You're sitting in an air-conditioned room right now, and you don't think about it. You reach for the thermostat, you twist a dial, and cool air floods the space around you. It's effortless. It's instant. It's modern. But for thousands of years before that dial existed, humans lived in some of the hottest places on Earth. And they didn't just survive. They thrived. They built empires. They raised pyramids. They slept through the night. So how did they do it? The ancient Egyptians faced brutal daytime heat that could exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun didn't care about their civilization. The desert didn't care about their ambitions. And yet, somehow, they kept their indoor temperatures around a comfortable 22 degrees Celsius, roughly 72 degrees Fahrenheit, in both summer and winter. Not with electricity, not with refrigerants, not with anything you'd recognize as air conditioning. They did it with mud, wind, water, and a profound understanding of how heat actually moves. Let's start with the walls themselves. The primary building material in ancient Egypt was mud brick, a simple mixture of soil, sand, straw, and water, pressed into blocks and left to dry in the sun. It sounds primitive. It sounds like something a child would make in a backyard. But mud brick had a property that modern glass and steel buildings utterly lack: thermal mass. During the day, the thick mud walls absorbed heat from the sun, keeping the interior cool. At night, when temperatures plummeted in the desert, those same walls slowly released the stored heat, warming the interior. It was passive climate control, built from dirt. The walls were thick, sometimes over a meter deep, and they created a time delay between the outside temperature and the inside temperature. By the time the heat outside reached its peak, the walls were still releasing last night's coolness. By the time the night got cold, the walls were releasing today's heat. Magdi Shaker, chief archaeologist at Egypt's Tourism and Antiquities Ministry, has studied this phenomenon extensively. He notes that one of the defining characteristics of all ancient Egyptian buildings was that the temperature inside them never exceeded 22 degrees Celsius. The material structure of the mud brick, the thickness of the wall, proximity to the Nile River waterways, canals, and, remember, there were no polluting industries and no energy sources of petrochemicals, which stabilized indoor temperatures, Shaker explained. But thick walls alone weren't enough. You also needed air. This is where the Egyptians got genuinely ingenious. They developed a technology called the mulcaf, a wind catcher that predates anything you'd find in a modern HVAC textbook. The mulcaf consisted of tall wall openings facing the prevailing winds. These openings acted like scoops, capturing wind from high above the building where the air was cooler and stronger, and funneling it downward into the interior. The entering wind created air circulation that vented heat out through other openings. Evidence of this technology dates back to at least 1300 BCE, clearly depicted in a wall painting of Nebuchadnezzar's house at Tel El Amarna, a painting that now resides in the British Museum. Think about what that means. Nearly 3,300 years ago, an Egyptian architect drew a diagram of a wind-catching ventilation system on a wall. That drawing survived. That system worked. And it worked so well that the basic principle is still being studied today by researchers at Washington State University, who are testing passive cooling methods that date back to 2500 BCE in ancient Egypt. But the Egyptians didn't stop at wind. They also used evaporative cooling, the same principle that makes sweat cool your skin. They covered windows and doors with reed mats. Sometimes, those mats were moistened with trickling water. As air blew through the wet mats, the water evaporated, cooling the air and making it more humid, which was actually beneficial in the dry desert climate. The mulcaf was sometimes equipped with fine mesh to purify the air from dust and impurities, and others were fitted with quantities of burnt coal to absorb unpleasant odors. This wasn't just cooling. This was air purification. And then there were the roofs. Most Egyptian homes had flat roofs. And on those hot, stifling nights, the roof became a bedroom. The family would climb up onto the roof, where the air was cooler and the breeze was stronger, and sleep under the stars. It was a nomadic behavior within their own homes, moving to wherever the temperature was most bearable at any given hour. Some roofs even had hooded vents that further aided the circulation of cool air into the house below, like an early take on air conditioning. But what about the heat you carried with you? Your own body? The ancient Egyptians understood that heat wasn't just outside, it was also inside. and they dressed accordingly. Most clothing was made from white linen, made from the flax plant. Linen was breathable, lightweight, and cool against the skin. It was also white, which reflected sunlight rather than absorbing it. Men wore a wraparound linen skirt called a kilt. Women wore simple dresses with straps. The wealthy wore fine, pleated robes. But the principle was the same for everyone. Cover your skin with something that breathes, and keep it light in color. Even the pharaohs, despite all their gold and grandeur, wore linen. In fact, linen was so valued that it was sometimes used as currency. And when an Egyptian died, they were wrapped in linen bandages, not just for ritual purity, but because linen was seen as a symbol of light. Now here's where it gets strange. You might be thinking, okay, architecture, clothing, wind catchers, that all makes sense. But how did they stay hydrated? How did they get enough water in the middle of a desert? The Nile, of course. But the Nile wasn't just a source of water. It was a source of cool water. The ancient Egyptians dug wells in their homes and villages to access groundwater, which was cooler than the surface water of the river. They also drank beer. Not the beer you know, but a thick, nutritious brew that provided energy, essential nutrients, and hydration. Workers on the pyramids were often paid in beer. Children drank it. It was safer than drinking directly from the Nile, which could carry bacteria. The beer was brewed from barley and emmer wheat, and it was so central to daily life that the god Osiris himself was said to have prepared a mixture of water and germinated grain. Even Egyptian princesses who married abroad had Nile water shipped to them. That's how much they trusted their water. But the most surprising part of all this might be what happened at night. You lie in bed on a hot summer night, tossing and turning, sweating through your sheets. The ancient Egyptians had a trick for that. They soaked their blankets in water before going to bed. As the water evaporated from the damp fabric, it drew heat away from their bodies. The same principle that makes a wet towel feel cold against your skin. This technique, sometimes called the Egyptian sleep method, is still being shared today as a viral hack for hot nights. But it wasn't just about wet blankets. They also used wooden headrests, curved blocks of wood that propped up the neck and head. These headrests served a dual purpose. They kept the head elevated, allowing air to circulate around it, and the smooth wood itself had a cooling effect. It sounds uncomfortable. It looks uncomfortable. But for thousands of years, Egyptians slept on these wooden pillows, night after night, in the middle of a desert. So here's the question that keeps haunting me. Why don't we build like this anymore? We have air conditioning. We have electricity. We have glass skyscrapers and sealed windows. And yet, when the power goes out during a heat wave, modern buildings become unbearable, sometimes literally deadly. The ancient Egyptians didn't have that problem. Their buildings worked with the climate, not against it. Their materials were cheap, local, and sustainable. Their designs were tested over millennia, and their indoor temperatures stayed at 22 degrees Celsius year-round, without a single watt of electricity. Today, researchers like Omar Al-Hassawi at Washington State University are studying these ancient techniques to find better ways to cool buildings without relying on mechanical systems. There's going to be a lot more air conditioning that's needed, especially with the population rise in the hotter regions of the world, Al-Hassawi said. How can we cool buildings to begin with, before relying on the mechanical systems? The answer might be hiding in 3,000-year-old mudbrick walls and wind-catching towers. You live in a world of thermostats and refrigerants. You flip a switch and cold air appears. But that switch is less than 120 years old. For 99.9% of human history, people didn't have it. And somehow, they not only survived, they built the pyramids, they mapped the stars, they created art and literature and mathematics that still astounds us today. They did all of that while sleeping on wooden pillows in the middle of a desert. So the next time you reach for that thermostat, pause for a second. Feel the cool air on your skin. And ask yourself, what would you do if that air wasn't there? What would you build? What would you wear? Where would you sleep? And would you have the ingenuity to turn mud, wind, and water into a civilization that lasted for thousands of years?